After nationwide protests decrying George Floyd's murder swept the country last summer, corporate America banded together and pledged to do their part in combating systemic racism. All in all, America's 50 biggest companies pledged just under $50 billion in financial commitments to racial equity. Among these 50 companies are Coca-Cola, MasterCard, Apple, Johnson & Johnson, Walmart, T-Mobile, and Microsoft, just to name a few. But reporting from the Washington Post finds that of the $50 billion, $45.2 billion is going to loans or investments that these corporations stand to profit from. That's right. Over 90% of the money corporate America pledged in George Floyd's name is allocated as expenditures from which they stand to make money back on. $4.2 billion is committed to actual grants, accounting for less than 1% of the $525.6 billion in profits the 50 corporations raked in last year. Team Rising joins us now to weigh in. Michael Starr Hopkins, Democratic strategist and Senior Vice President of Firehouse Strategies, and Patrice Onwuka, Senior Policy Analyst at the Independent Women's Forum, joins us. Welcome, both of you, to the show. Michael, I'm going to start with you on this. I mean, so this money was supposed to be going to fight racial injustice, and what exactly did these companies do instead? It seems pretty sinister.
I mean, I was never one of those who had a lot of faith in corporations solving, racial inequality issues. I think a lot of these donations were clickbait that, comms people came up with in the comm shop. I really wanted to look at what's the diversity makeup on their boards, what's the diversity makeup in their C-suites, things like that, things that really make a difference and put different thought processes and different life experiences in the room when we're making decisions. I think that's really what I wanted to look at and see. And so far, we haven't really seen much of a difference.
Right, and also the pay gap. Would be interesting to see those statistics. What does the average, let's say, white employee at one of these companies make? What does the average black employee make at one of these companies? Patrice, if they had to publish that data, how do you think it would look?
I mean, I think it would be interesting, depending on where minorities are concentrated in the career tracks and the levels of management. I think you'd see some interesting things. But to back up 1 second, I was concerned when I saw all of these honestly virtue signals by corporations to say that they're fighting equity, fighting injustice, by directing money to groups that frankly, are taking a very narrow focus on how to uplift minorities in general. Supporting Black Lives Matter, the organization, for example, that's a very narrow approach to trying to deal with some of the problems that minority groups face, from home ownership to a lack of economic mobility. And what's interesting is some of the groups that reaped quite a lot of money, like the Black Lives Matter network, they kept a lot of that money at the top level and never pushed that money down to local chapters. And what they were really fighting for was not what I think many Black people in this country would say would help everyone. So, this kind of transparency over what happens with their dollars, to me, it's like, that's not surprising, but hey, let's think through how you actually help all Americans, and particularly minorities. Where are you sending the money and what's being done with that? And let's not forget that philanthropic organizations and even corporate dollars through philanthropy, they may not be marked for social justice causes, but that doesn't mean they're not doing actual good to people who need help in this country, including minorities.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Patrice. I mean, the sort of corporate, signaling that they're virtue signaling that they're trying to do something to help, but it looks like it didn't have any real impact. I would go back to Michael's point that they would probably be best served to actually look institutionally, internally, and see what are we doing to be more equitable, to try to promote and create opportunities for people of all creeds and races to be able to thrive within our organization, rather looking externally to these very narrow groups. So I think that's a very good way of looking at it. And color me not surprised that corporate America was really just trying to get a good PR bump out of this and not actually invested in the cause.
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely. I mean, this was a huge PR gimmick. And it may help. It at the time, certainly, it lifted their branding a little bit with some communities more than others. But all of whether you're talking about social justice groups that receive the money or the corporations that were intended to give it, they're going to have to figure out what is the actual outcome. And if a normal Black kid in an inner city who was marching for George Floyd and thinking, oh, finally, we're going to get resources, whether it's for police reform or, hey, to support a local community, library in my community, and they don't see that, then I think everyone will look back and say, well, what was this really all for? And that's a good question to be asking right now.
And Michael, I had a theory on a lot of these corporate statements at the time, and I'd like to get your take on it. My sense at the time was not exactly that these companies were reacting to kind of consumer demand. I think it didn't hurt them to put out these statements, but I don't think that's what drove it. I think what drove it was that internally, a lot of their employees at the mid to lower levels were pressuring them from inside, saying, I want to work at a company that where its values reflect my own values. And so why hasn't Nestle issued a statement on George Floyd yet, or why hasn't Walmart issued a statement on George Floyd yet? And so as a result, the companies, to satisfy internal pressure, released these statements, which then didn't lead to anything, as we're seeing. It was just a statement to mollify people internally. So if I'm right, isn't it incumbent on those employees to continue their organizing? Or is it that all you wanted was a statement so that you could feel good about going to your Fortune 50 job?
So I agree with you. I think internal pressure was the leading cause. I also think stockholders for publicly owned companies were a huge portion of what motivated these companies to do this. And I think at the end of the day, one of the few positives you're seeing out of COVID is that minorities are leaving companies that they're not happy with and starting new career paths. I think a lot of people are really taking this as an opportunity to step back, pause, reflect, and think about what work they do and whether they're actually contributing to the greater good. And I think you're going to see over the next 5 or so years that a lot of people are leaving jobs and starting new careers and really trying to work with companies that not only do they believe in terms of the product that they're producing, but ethically are they a company that supports them in themselves.
Well, Michael, let me just say, I agree with you. I love entrepreneurship, and I want to see as many people, my skin color, everybody's skin color on this panel, start businesses and be their own boss. But at the end of the day, if you're a public company, your responsibility is to your shareholders. And if you're a firm, public or private, your number one goal is profit. There is nothing wrong with profit. And I think it's unfortunate, but a lot of what we're hearing today is that if you are not a social justice warrior and you're raising the banner for equity, which is very different from equality, by the way, which is something we all support. But if you're not raising the banner for that, then somehow you are not contributing to society in a meaningful, beneficial way. And I don't think corporations should feel the pressure from staff or anyone else to feel like they need to put anything above profit. Profit actually is value generating because it allows them to hire lots of people of different colors and to create the products and services that make our economy move forward and expand economic mobility. So I have to push. I agree. I love entrepreneurship and I love those who want to step out on their own. But I don't think corporations need to be in the business of trying to be a social justice warrior. They need to be in the business of their mission. And that goes for nonprofits and foundations as well.
Well,
I'll push back just a little bit real quick. I own my own firm, and I can't make a profit if I don't have employees. And so it becomes a chicken or the egg kind of prospect. And so I think, yes, making a profit is the most important thing in terms of having a business, but having employees to be able to make that profit is kind of where, the intersection is.
Well, and just to take a totally cynical viewpoint of all of this, I would say that these companies are actually, in fact, investing in these different causes purely to give themselves cover for down the road. So they're taking 100%. Advantage of a moment in the country. And so down the road, when they inevitably get in trouble because they don't have representation on their board or they've, fired a minority, they can say, but we gave this much money to BLM. That's my greed.
Well, I mean, just to kind of, I guess, to kind of run defense for these companies in some way, I suppose. But, maybe, Patrice, you would actually agree with what these companies did based on what you just said, which is that what they're asserting is they're saying, look, we didn't want to just donate. I mean, I don't know what they're saying, but just looking at the numbers, clearly they gave a very small percentage of money to the actual organizations as an act of charity, but the remainder of it was for loans. And it's a lot of what you were saying, Patrice. It's these loans to start businesses. It's these loans to buy homes. And so are you fundamentally against these businesses saying the way we're going to help the movement, the way we're going to help racial inequality is by offering these loans? I mean, obviously, we'd need to look at the terms of the loans to make sure they're not predatory in nature. But would you prefer them to be giving this money as a gift, or instead to be giving opportunity to people and saying, here's your chance to start that business, here's your chance to buy a house?
Yeah, I actually agreed with how they're doing it. I mean, the gifts aside, I think the actual idea of the loans and the investments actually does make more sense. Now, when you start to put, again, we don't know what the terms are and the stipulations are, but I do think generally that might be a stronger approach than just giving a big amount of money to a very small, narrow group of organizations that claim to be focusing on racial justice. So yeah, I think I could probably defend them a little bit.
Again, we'll have to see what the loans were, the predatory, if they were predatory in nature or whatnot. But I can kind of see their point when we do look at what happened with BLM and the leadership and taking money or
right,
somehow buying houses, and maybe there's something more beneficial to giving opportunity rather than giving money. I don't know.
If I had to guess, these were things that they were already doing, and they just reclassified them as things that they were doing on behalf of equity. And congratulations to us for that. Patrice, Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
And we'll have more Rising for you right after this.